Freedom. M. Odell for Addictions. Written by Slate and Markwscheeren. With Michelle Dunbar. Table of Contents. Foreword. Acknowledgements. Preface. The Addiction and Recovery Religion. The Freedom Model. Pursuit of happiness is the key. Abstinence or your life. The false alternative. Starting on the right foot. Substance use is risky. Beliefs are powerful. Chapter 1, How to Escape the Addiction and Recovery Trap. Addiction and recovery ideology is wrong and creates perpetual struggle. The Freedom Model. Nobody needs treatment. Addiction and recovery, two sides of the same coin. An important note about the Recovery Society. Chapter 2, You have to want it to work. The Freedom Model, a positive approach. Do you want recovery? Cornered into perpetual recovery. Lost in processes. Indirect processes of change. Chapter 3, The Quick Answers. Are you denying that addiction exists? What is the Freedom Model and how can it help me? How do I quit drinking or drugging? How do I deal with withdrawal? How do I resist cravings? Isn't addiction genetic? Can I really moderate? Be patient. Chapter 4, Why do I keep doing this? Why do I prefer it? Some primary reasons behind a preference for intoxication. The secondary fortifying reasons behind a strong preference for intoxication. The simplest explanation is the most accurate explanation. Chapter 5, Causes versus Reasons. The causes of addiction. Probabilities. Mind matters. Focus on reasons, not causes. Chapter 6, Learned Connections. What are learned connections? How beliefs form and why they are hard to challenge. The Hopi. Some evidence to consider. But what about my specific problem? What you really need to know. We aren't diminishing or dismissing your problems. The 3 building blocks of freedom. Chapter 7, The Positive Drive Principle. All choices are made in pursuit of happiness. Costly behaviors are a pursuit of happiness too. Happier options. Outcomes don't reverse motives. There's one direction of motivation, toward happiness. Happiness is subjective and a mixed bag. Why is recognizing the pursuit of happiness so important? Fear alone isn't enough. What to remember. Chapter 8, T. He addict/alcoholic self-image. Everything changes once you see yourself as addicted. Reality, interpretations, and feelings. Self-image matters. Chapter 9, Learning the Addict's Self-Image. The Playground Effect. Deviance, shame, shoulds, and justification. Incentivized helplessness. Learning addiction from culture. The myth of addictive drugs. Overcomplicating the problem. Learning helplessness through false failures. Those tempting underlying causes. You can break out of the addict role. Chapter 10, Constructive Self-Images. You can change your self-image with knowledge. Changing learned connections. You have a choice. Chapter 11, Mental Autonomy and Free Will. Do you agree? Shedding the addict/alcoholic self-image. Chapter 12, Leaving the Cage of Recovery. Living like a caged lion. Living free. Chapter 13, Success. Success is knowing that you are free and happily choosing what you see as best for you. What if you approached the decision without shame? It's your choice to make, and here's why it matters. You are free to rethink the benefits of continued substance use. You are free to rethink the benefits of reducing or quitting substance use. You are free to shift your focus from costs to benefits. Moving forward. Chapter 14, Reclaiming Your Freedom and Happiness. You are what you think. Identical thoughts equals identical feelings and behaviors. Choose a new self-image. Direct preference change. Chapter 15, Motivators versus Deterrents. You don't have to quit. coercion and ultimatums, shame and shoulds, holding onto powerlessness. Starting off on the right foot. Categorical thinking, good and bad substances. Categorical thinking, priorities. Everything has a price. Chapter 16, Forging a Lasting Preference Change. What is a preference? Multiple options. The problem with replacement. Don't make your change unnecessarily conditional. Unhappiness isn't a cause of heavy substance use. The preference rut. Chapter 17, Questioning Drug Effects. You can't need what doesn't help you. Placebo effect and active placebos. The perceived effects caused by identical substances. The glaring contradictions. Chapter 18, The Illusion of Emotional Relief. Drugs and alcohol can't think for you. Constructing the illusion. The power of distraction, bandaging a vicious cycle. Reprieves. What applies to stress applies to other emotions too. Chapter 19, Lowered Inhibitions and the License to Misbehave. Can the same substance create opposite effects? The perceived effects caused by identical substances. The origin of the license to misbehave. The history of the license to misbehave. The illusory benefits of lowered inhibitions. Chapter 20, Pleasure. Pleasurable things. Attributing pleasure to substances. The not-so-simple pleasure center. Substances are subjectively enjoyed. Chapter 21, The Benefits of Adjusted Substance Use. Adjusted substance use, a new choice. The relative benefits of adjusted substance use. The freedom model is not harm reduction. Reframing costs too. The freedom model perspective of benefits. Chapter 22, The Hidden Costs. Benefits of substance use, you're not stuck. Chapter 23, A Happier Vision. Weighing your options. The benefits of substance use revisited. The benefits of adjusted substance use or abstinence. Vision. Pitfalls of goal setting. Moving forward. Appendix A, The Myth of Loss of Control. You can't regain what was never lost. What does out of control mean? Appendix B, The Brain Disease Model of Addiction. The Emotional Rhetoric. The Neuroscience Explanation. Appendix C, Addiction Isn't Chronic. Appendix D, Heroin and the Myth of Addictiveness. The Heroin Mythology. The Truth of Heroin. The Irresistible High. Moderate opiate users. Why we don't hear about moderate users. Moderate use does not inevitably progress to addiction. Can moderate users inject? Can an addict ever go back to moderate use? Does withdrawal make heroin/opiates addictive? Appendix E, People can moderate if they prefer it. You can moderate, but is that what you really want to do? Yeah, but I tried before and lost control. The Myth of Willpower. What about impaired judgment? The Bottom Line. Afterword. About the authors. Foreword. By Peter Venturelli, Ph.D. As a university professor, I devoted 34 years of my life to teaching, researching, and publishing my accumulated and trusted knowledge and beliefs about major theoretical findings concerning drug use and abuse. For example, one of my ongoing publications, now in the 13th edition, Drugs and Society, by Hansen, Venturelli, and Fleckenstein, Jones and Bartlett Learning, Burlington. Ma 2017, is a comprehensive text covering drug use and abuse. Point 1. At this point in time, after reading the Freedom Model, many of my beliefs about drug use and addiction have been turned on their head. I am confident in predicting that authors Slate and Markwscheeren have written a revolutionary book that will challenge your conventional beliefs about drug use, addiction, and recovery. The Freedom Model fully explains a simple idea that has guided Baldwin Research Institute's groundbreaking work at the Freedom Model retreats for 3 decades, emphasizing that serious alcohol and/or drug problems are solved By personal choice. Logically speaking, since personal choices cause drinking and/or drugging behavior, other personal choices can also modify or eliminate this behavior. Any attachment to a drug is created by self-action, and any lasting change of this attachment consists of reorienting your thinking about drugs and drug use. Other corresponding views that the freedom model begins with are the premises that, as humans, all of us pursue happiness with free will and mental autonomy. Hence, we are not robots whose minds can be hacked into. Simply put, as the authors have eloquently stated, the freedom model is simply a different way of thinking about alcohol and other drugs. The freedom model will challenge many of your beliefs about the use of alcohol and other drug substances. How alcohol and other drugs are viewed depends on past conceptions, personally held beliefs, and the extent to which we have been exposed to inaccurate and erroneous assumptions that we often believe are factual. The reader will realize that such concocted concepts as addiction and addiction as a disease, addicts, alcoholics, recovery, powerlessness over drug use, etc., do not really exist in the world of alcohol and/or drug use. As I have experienced, prior beliefs regarding alcohol and/or drug use may very well be smashed to smithereens after reading through this volume. The 23 chapters and 5 appendices that encapsulate the freedom model will inform the reader how individuals with drug habits can break free from the shackles of erroneous and outdated information. This text is well written, timely, elegant in its writing, thought-provoking, and convincing, resulting in a mental revolution. In conclusion, from the research presented together with the invaluable facts and insights of authors Slate and Scheeren, what is written in this text will be memorable, satisfying, and life-changing. The freedom model shows you how to opt out of the drug rehabilitation money-making machine's ongoing battle against addiction, and address your problems where they truly exist, in the realm of personal choice. Professor Peter J. Venturelli, Professor Emeritus, Department of Sociology and Criminology, Valparaiso University. Without Gerald Brown's inquisitive mind and determination to find out what was going wrong in the treatment industry, this solution would not exist today. We thank him for his bravery and boldness in founding Baldwin Research Institute, and inviting us to continue his work. There are countless Freedom Model Retreat staff members, our board members, and guests, past and present, without whom our work couldn't have been completed. We thank you all for your contribution. There have been many daring researchers and authors who challenged the Recovery Society, and whose work inspired us on the intellectual end. There are too many to name and thank here, but you can find many of them in the citations throughout the book. We encourage readers to seek out their work. Guests at our retreats can find much of it in our library. Stanton Peele has been fearlessly challenging the Recovery Society for over 40 years. He compiled and made sense of mounds of research, generating groundbreaking insights in books such as The Meaning of Addiction, and Diseasing of America. We're proud to call him an influence on our work, and a friend. Finally, Ryan Schwantz isn't listed as an author of this text, but has been integral part of Bree's development of the freedom model ideas and applications. In addition, he keeps our organization running smoothly, and handles far too many responsibilities behind the scenes. His contributions to the development of the freedom model are invaluable. The addiction and recovery religion. For those indoctrinated into the addiction and recovery religion, the first reaction to the idea of people successfully moderating their use is anger and fear. They do not believe it is possible for true addicts or alcoholics to control and monitor their use. They view the statement that people can successfully moderate as heresy and honestly believe the information is dangerous and even deadly, because to them it provides a false sense of security. They see the prospect of moderation as the great lie that alcoholics or addicts must never allow themselves the privilege of thinking is a realistic option. And so, with this belief system and fear intact, we can easily see why you may be repelled or frightened by the mere mention of moderation. It is entirely understandable. We too once felt this way. We feared alcohol and drugs and all that went with them. And then we did the research, now having devoted nearly 3 decades of our lives to it. And our eyes were opened. In this book, we make many bold statements like the one above. We do so based on facts. Many of the statements will surprise you, but they will also liberate you. We challenge and break down all the myths on which the addiction and recovery religion stands. You, the reader, will be shocked and surprised to know that ending an addiction is easy and that addiction does not actually exist as a state of loss of control or hopelessness, but only as a state of belief in loss of control and hopelessness. Addiction is a set of beliefs held together by myths, mysticism, and misguided ideas, as well as misinterpreted and flawed research. Fear of substances and their powers is the dominant focus in the recovery society mindset. The treatment centers are its churches, the recovery zealots are its missionaries, and the addicts and alcoholics are its unknowing followers. To be a part of this religious movement, you must both romanticize and fear the mythical, supernatural powers of drugs and alcohol. You must understand that the addicts or alcoholics are diseased, lost souls with no ability to stop themselves from being led by the magical pull of substances. Addiction gurus are the priests leading their flock to salvation. Finally, the court system enforces their dogma, making this a theocracy. In this religion, people talk of substances as if they were living, breathing beings bent on their destruction. For example, users say things like heroin calls to me, alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful, or I'm battling addiction, just to name a few. The religion of addiction is one of the primary causes of the increasing death rates from overdose. Opiates have existed for thousands of years, as have alcohol, and a variety of substances that are heavily used today. The rates of use for these substances have historically been stable for decades in Western societies until now. As treatment has flourished over the past 50 years, so have the rates of overdose, dangerous binge usage, and heavy continuous use. As researchers, we had to ask, has something intrinsically changed in humans that can explain the increased rates of heavy use and death compared to the generations of the past? It's not the drugs that have changed, because they are pharmacologically no different than they were. Today's heroin, prescription painkillers, and alcohol work much the same as the opiates and alcohol of antiquity. The only remarkable change has been in our cultural ideas, theories, and beliefs surrounding substance use. Those changes contain misinformation that causes exceptional sadness and tragedy. Behind the senseless wave of current trends in overdose and death in Western societies is the idea that once people start, they can't stop, and that substances have the supernatural power to enslave people. With that mantra, people give up, keep using addictively, and die in a state of utter hopelessness. It doesn't have to be this way. The freedom model changes all that. The freedom model. The freedom model is not a program, nor a process of recovery, nor a Moderation advocate of any kind. It is not treatment, counseling, or therapy. Instead, it is a way of thinking about the choices you can and will make in your own life. It is an approach about a confused idea called addiction and recovery. And it seeks to clear the air on these constructs. The freedom model debunks all the addiction and recovery myths so you can happily choose one of three options. Continue to use heavily, use moderately, whatever that means to you, or abstain and freely choose your options based on facts and confidence, not fiction and fear. It allows you to make the pursuit of greater happiness your deciding factor. Pursuit of happiness is the key. People exist in all sorts of voluntarily maintained engagements with which they are nonetheless dissatisfied: jobs, careers, relationships, living situations, and of course habits such as using alcohol and other drugs. But as dissatisfying and painful as these involvements can be, people do not move on from them until they believe they have a happier option available to them: a better job, a better career, a better relationship, or a better living situation. Until a credibly happier option is seen, they feel stuck. This applies to habits such as heavy substance use. 2. From our beginnings of helping people almost 30 years ago, our approach has had a single defining theme in the pursuit of happiness. We have shown people that if they can develop the conviction that a change to their substance use habits will produce greater happiness, then they will happily, easily, and permanently change their habits for the better. They will get unstuck and move on. That is the natural way of personal change. This should be common sense, and yet it is directly at odds with standard methods of help for people with substance use problems. The directive against any discussion of moderation exemplifies this best, which is why we chose this topic as our opening salvo. Let us explain. Abstinence or your life. The false alternative. When you arrive for help in the addiction and recovery world, you are hit immediately with a scare tactic. They say that you must never touch a single dose of alcohol or other drugs for the rest of your life, or else you will lose control, ceaselessly consuming substances at disastrous levels. They try to make the issue a no-brainer by presenting you with a false alternative: either you abstain for the rest of your life, or get back on the fast track to an addicted hell of jails, institutions, and an early death, as the popular phrase from 12-step programs puts it. In this binary set of options, your pursuit of happiness never enters the equation. Fear and panic rule the decision-making process. Think of it this way: if a mugger catches you in an alleyway, pulls out a gun, and gives you the ultimatum, your money or your life, is it really a positive decision when you hand over your wallet? Of course not. It's a coerced decision, one that you make begrudgingly, and one that you regret and resent having had to make. The ultimatum of abstinence or your life is much the same. It is a coerced decision, made out of fear, panic, and other negative emotions. It is one where your pursuit of happiness is made irrelevant. The scientific evidence is clear: nobody loses control of their substance use. Not even the most extreme users, see Appendix A. If you don't lose control, then you are capable of moderate use. This is a simple logical conclusion based on the facts, and it is borne out in the research. 50% of former alcoholics become moderate drinkers, see Appendix E. Yet treatment providers insist on telling substance users that they have a disease or allergy that causes them to lose control over their drug and alcohol usage upon taking a single dose of a substance. They do this because it's a convenient shortcut by which they can coerce you into immediately agreeing to the substance use goal that they've chosen for you. The difference between addiction counselors and the mugger is this: the mugger is forcing a one-time decision, but the counselors are trying to force a lifelong decision. It's no wonder this tactic fails so often. People end up miserable while abstaining, feeling deprived of joy, and eventually go back to the old pattern of heavy substance use. This becomes a demoralizing and increasingly dangerous cycle between abstinence and reckless usage for too many people. You can be happy in abstinence. You can be happy moderating your usage. Talk to anyone who successfully maintains a change to their substance use habit without struggle, and you will find that they are genuinely happier with the change. Talk to those who struggle to maintain recovery, and you will find that they feel deprived, like they're missing out. They feel like abstinence is a burden, it's their cross to bear. The long-term strategy for maintaining fear-initiated abstinence in the recovery religion is to keep the fear alive. So they try to get you signed up for ongoing aftercare treatment or heavy involvement in support groups. In this realm, you are battered daily with dire predictions of what will happen if you forget. How disastrous any substance use will be for you. You are warned daily against ever thinking you could have a drink or drug without losing control. You are pressured into defining as an addict or alcoholic, a handicapped person who is powerless over substances. The support you receive is in maintaining this fragile identity, and in coping on a daily level with the fact that you've been robbed of the ability to control your substance use by the disease of addiction. Starting on the right foot. Those who come to see a change as genuinely happier and more satisfying than their previous problematic style of substance use change rapidly, and maintain the change happily. This is most directly achieved by reassessing the relative benefits of various levels of use, including abstinence. Happiness is front in center in their decision-making process. For decades now, we've seen that when we can communicate this strategy successfully, success in change follows. Panic-based decisions of lifelong abstinence are a massive obstacle to communicating our message. The false alternative of abstinence or uncontrolled use makes your pursuit of happiness irrelevant in the decision-making process. It literally closes your mind to the sort of realizations that really power a successful change. By shortcutting the decision-making process with fear and panic, it also shortcuts the process of reassessment in which you would have been able to develop the conviction that moderation or abstinence is truly your happier option. Hopefully now you can see that we didn't start with this topic of moderation just to be shocking or contrarian. We started with it so that you can start off on the right foot, and immediately begin the process of imagining greater happiness in changing your habits. If that never happens, you will never be happier making a change, you will struggle, you will white-knuckle it trying to stay sober, and you will quite probably go back to destructive styles of substance use. By coming face to face with the fact that you are capable of moderation now, you give yourself the best chance of quickly and happily changing. Remember this though, to say that you can moderate is not to say that you should moderate. You should do whatever offers you the greatest level of happiness as an individual. You will gravitate to whatever level of substance use you see as offering you the greatest happiness, from heavy usage to abstinence, and anything in between. For you to change, you need to figure this out. Please don't skip this process. Let go of the fear and proceed with a reality-based view. Substance use is risky. It is a fact that substance use has risks, and you probably already know what most of those risks are. For one example, tainted drugs of unknown purity and quality have recently led to waves of overdose deaths. It seems there is tragedy everywhere surrounding substance use. It is easy to see why the treatment zealots and recovery society jump straight to an abstinence-only model. We don't mean to downplay the dangers by saying moderation is possible. We only mean to set the record straight. That loss of control over substance usage is a myth, so that you can approach this from a place of achieving greater happiness and long-term success, rather than making a short-lived decision based on fear and panic. It would be easy for us to try to use fear to manipulate you into agreeing to abstinence, but it just isn't effective in the big picture. What's more, the practice of convincing people to make decisions based on things you know to be untrue is called fraud. It is unethical, and can only have bad consequences in the long run. The freedom model and everyone at Baldwin Research remains completely neutral on whether or not anyone should use substances at any level. It is not our job to tell people what personal decisions to make, or to deny or grant permission to anyone to use substances. As educators, our job is simply to present the truth about substance use so that people can make informed decisions about it. Here are two important truths. Moderate use is possible for anyone, because loss of control is a myth. Risk-free substance use is not possible for anyone. Every action in life carries some level of risk and cost. It is up to you to be aware, and decide what level of risks and costs are acceptable to you for the return you get from substance use. Beliefs are powerful. We want to make the following point absolutely clear: as long as you are a believer in addiction and recovery, you should never attempt to moderate or use at all. That statement, of course, makes sense, considering your adherence to the belief in powerlessness. If you believe a class of people called addicts exists who cannot stop taking drugs and or alcohol once they start, and that you might be one, then any level of use is a bad and potentially fatal idea for you. As a believer, any attempt to adjust your substance use will be undermined by your skepticism of free will over substance use. Free will is an absolute. Either you have it, or you don't. If you believe drugs can enslave you, abstain. If you believe in loss of control, abstain. If you believe in recovery, abstain. If you believe in addiction, abstain. But know that even with a sound rejection of addiction and recovery, you might still determine that abstinence is best for you. Many do. If that is your choice, we hope you can arrive there in the pursuit of happiness, rather than through fear and panic. Here's the truth: drugs don't inherently contain addictiveness, see Appendix D, and people have free will and can choose for themselves. Based on a thorough analysis of the available data provided by the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the National Institutes of Health, and others, the fact is that more than 90% of people who have a serious drug or alcohol problem will quit or moderate, most without any professional help. This statistic is well established by addiction research, but, for obvious reasons, is rarely admitted or talked about by treatment providers. Addiction and recovery are made up constructs that promote our society's preoccupation with controlling others' behaviors, not with helping individuals navigate through their chosen habits. Just like all those who have changed their substance use on their own, you are free to choose what's best for you and your life. Before you begin reading this book, we make one suggestion: read the entire book before you make a lifelong choice about substance use. If you have any vestige of fear or lack of confidence in your inherent ability to moderate or stop your addiction, then complete abstinence is the only safe option for you at this moment. Once you know the truth, that you are free to choose, you can make sound decisions and with a mind devoid of fear. By knowing the facts and losing the fear of substances and their mythical powers, you can choose any substance use option available to you without the guilt or shame that keeps you distracted and stuck in heavy use. But just because you read this book doesn't mean that all the risks associated with using substances go away. It simply means you will be aware that you can change on a dime and that you need never be trapped in a single usage pattern again. The costs and risks involved in substance use are always there. This includes not only the risks to health, but also the risks to your freedom and social life. Just because you now know that you're not doomed to lose control of your substance use, doesn't mean that others who wield some control over your life will understand this. Various people in your life may choose to impose costs on you for the sin of moderate substance use. Employers may fire you. Judges and probation officers may put you in jail. Family members and friends may shun you, and withdraw various forms of support because they disagree with your choices. This all remains a great possibility. If you decide to moderate, you will understand there are risks associated with that level of use, but you will also know that you can choose to abstain at any time with ease. Our approach provides a path to realizing your natural ability to chart the course of your life, whereas the addiction and recovery paradigm sees all levels of substance use as a road to institutions, jails, and death. It is the difference between being free to change and being enslaved to addiction and/or recovery that clearly defines what the freedom model is all about. Whether or not the other people in your life recognize the truth about addiction, all that matters is that you recognize the truth, and use it to make informed, effective decisions. The rest of the text will explain all the nuances of making a happiness-based choice about your future substance use. Bear this in mind as you read the book. The freedom model does not deny the inherent dangers of substance use, and should you choose to keep using in any fashion, those risks are still there. Furthermore, if after having read the book, you still want to hang on to all or part of the addiction/recovery myths, then abstinence is your only disaster-free choice. But should you gain an understanding and embrace your free will and inherent abilities to choose your thoughts, desires, and behaviors, then you will have opened the door to a world of infinite possibilities. Chapter 1. How to escape the addiction and recovery trap. The nation is currently amid a tragic wave of drug overdose deaths, the rate of which is rising rapidly. Alcohol-related deaths and the incidence of alcohol use disorder are going up as well. Hardly a day goes by without tragic stories in the news featuring pictures of beautiful, young people who had so much promise but lost their lives to drugs. The cause of death in these stories used to be kept secret. But now, the parents and other family members are warning others of the dangers and advocating for treatment. That's all they can do to try to help others through the loss of their loved ones. The hope is that the story of their children's deaths will serve to prevent further tragedies. It's a tough, courageous, and noble choice to be open about these deaths. As if the tragedy of these overdoses isn't dark enough, there's an even darker side of the story that nobody sees. The news media, politicians, and activists are all using these stories to lobby for more addiction treatment. Yet, what you'll often find is that the overdose victims had received every available addiction treatment, often multiple times. Their families had spent tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars getting what they were told was the best available help. And yet their children still ended up dying. And the solution to this mess, according to the politicians, is more of the same treatment? It just doesn't add up. Something is wrong here. Why should we be calling for more of exactly what doesn't work when the evidence that it doesn't work is right in front of our faces? Addiction and recovery ideology is wrong and creates perpetual struggle. The very concept of addiction, whether it's called a disease, a disorder, or something else, says that some people, i.e., addicts and alcoholics, are enslaved to the behavior of substance use. They cross some line where they are no longer actively choosing to use substances of their own free will, but instead are compelled to use. It's also said that they are unable to stop themselves from using. Once they start, they experience a loss of control. They are unable to stop wanting to use substances. They experience craving. All of this just happens without their consent, that they're triggered by various things and feelings, and they're in for a lifetime of struggling with their demons, the chronic relapsing disease and ongoing recovery. In summary, those who promote the idea of addiction explain that heavy substance use users should see themselves as enslaved and in for a lifelong struggle, in which they'll never be fully free. This lifelong struggle is referred to as recovery. Throughout this book, we use the terms recovery society and recovery ideology to refer to the institutions and people who believe in and spread the concept of addiction as involuntary behavior. This includes many different versions of this concept and its related ideas, including the Recovery Society's recommendations on how to address a substance use problem. We consider this recovery ideology to be faulty, based on much misinformation, and harmful to substance users. The increased rates of addiction and massive increase in opiate and alcohol-related deaths in our country are the best evidence that this is the case. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, addiction rates remained stable, and rates of recovery without treatment were climbing. But, at the turn of the century, the Recovery Society was busy rolling out fancy new neuroimaging data, i.e., brain scans of addicts, see Appendix B, with the claim that it was proof that heavy substance users truly can't control themselves. They've even gone as far as to claim that addicts have hijacked brains and that drugs rob them of free will. The public ate this up because it sounded very scientific. So it finally seemed that almost everyone was convinced that addiction is a disease that permanently handicaps those afflicted. As the public embraced the Recovery Society's new brain disease model of addiction, treatment became a necessity, and the industry began to grow by billions of dollars in business. Rates of addiction, rates of overdose, and rates of alcohol and drug-related deaths started going up. None of this is a coincidence. Belief in addiction sows the seeds of self-doubt that make people feel helpless and hopeless. True believers are convinced that they don't have the ability to change and that, as the Recovery Society prescribes, they'll need to struggle endlessly while receiving ongoing help to battle against addiction. This entire ideology becomes a vicious trap that ensnares people in either years of unnecessary suffering or, worst case, death. This isn't speculation, it is fact. Research in which alcoholics were given a test to gauge how strongly they believed in several common tenets of addiction, such as loss of control or genetic a disposition to alcoholism, showed that those who believed most strongly in addiction were more likely to relapse following treatment. In fact, this belief system was one of the top predictors of relapse after controlling for dozens of other factors, including the severity of the drinking problem. Miller, Westerberg, Harris, and Tanigan, 1996. Other research has shown that those exposed to these ideas formally in treatment subsequently had binge drinking Rates 9 times higher than those who were exposed to a more choice-based view, and a binge rate 5 times higher than those who received no treatment at all. Brandsma, 1980. Heroin users binge after treatment too, as was shown by a study of over 150,000 heroin addicts in England that overdose risk skyrocketed in the weeks immediately following the completion of treatment. Pierce et al. 2016, it only makes sense that people would give up trying to change and dive headlong into substance use when they've been taught that quitting and sustaining it is going to be a losing battle anyway. As belief in addiction, as a true state of involuntary substance use, has exploded in our culture, so too have rates of addiction. But as one prolific drug researcher noted, conversely, cultures in which people do not believe drugs can cause the loss of control exhibit very little of it. Rehab Man, 2005. The false and toxic ideology of addiction and recovery is what makes people struggle so hard to change their substance use habits. It is what makes you struggle. The freedom model. Whereas recovery ideology says heavy substance users are enslaved and involuntarily using substances, the freedom model says just the opposite. It says that people are actively and freely choosing each time they take a dose of drugs or alcohol, and that one simple thing motivates them to do so: the pursuit of happiness. There can be myriads of reasons for substance use held in the mind of the individual: pleasure, stress relief, a desire for a social lubricant, but it all boils down to substance users seeing the next dose as their best available option for feeling good. Some will say that heavy substance users find the conditions of their lives intolerable while sober, so they use substances as an escape. But this is just another way of saying that they see intoxication as the happier option. In the freedom model, we recognize that heavy substance users are fully free to change at any time, and they need not look forward to a lifelong struggle in recovery. Although the brain disease model of addiction is convincing at first, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and neither do the other major claims about addiction, such as loss of control, inability to stop without treatment, and others. These topics will all be addressed throughout the book. Addicts truly are free to choose differently. When they become fully convinced that some lesser amount of substance use is the happier option, they decrease either substance use. Accordingly, with this change in perspective, they find that there is no need to struggle to abstain or moderate. They find that it is easily initiated and sustained. Yes, we said it will be easy. We know this word will hit some readers as dismissive of the struggle, pain, and suffering they've experienced. To feel addicted is genuinely frustrating and painful. The authors of this book have been through it. We struggled for years, and in the depths of it we even seriously contemplated suicide. However, that was a long time ago, and we're here to write this today because we found our way out of it. When we finally got over our problem, what we discovered was that it was far easier to overcome than we thought it would be. Once we really got it, there were no more struggles to stay sober and drug-free. We do nothing to maintain recovery or to keep us from using substances addictively. We've had thousands of guests at our retreats over the past 3 decades who have had this same experience of ease moving on from addiction. It will be easy for you too. So although the word easy may be unsettling to some, it is the truth, and we'd be doing you a disservice if we didn't say it now. You will eventually realize it is easy, and that is a blessing. The Recovery Society has infected our culture with misinformation about substances and substance use. This misinformation is everywhere in our society. Children are taught it in schools ND public service announcements, our news, media and entertainment is full of it, we hear it from our friends and family, and it is spread by the institutions charged with helping substance users. All this misinformation distorts how you experience substance use, your desire for substances, and your choices to use substances. Whether or not you've received treatment, you definitely have been exposed to the recovery ideology, and it can breed self-doubt within you if you believe it. This misinformation is, in fact, what makes some of you feel so helpless to change. The more you believe it, the more you feel addicted. You can make whatever changes you want in your substance use habits and do so right now. If you feel like you can't do it on your own or that you need treatment, it's only because the recovery ideology has convinced you with its misinformation that this is true. Our goal is to lift the fog of confusion it has created and show you that you can. We're going to start right now by taking on one of its biggest myths, the idea that heavy substance users are unable to stop or moderate their substance use without treatment, support, and a lifetime of trying to recover from the disease of addiction. Nobody needs treatment. A popular statistic thrown around by the Recovery Society says that only 1 in 10 addicts get the treatment they need. Depending on the data you look at, these numbers are accurate. Only 10% to 20% of Americans who have ever fit the diagnosis of addiction get formal help, in the form of treatment, support group, attendance, or a combination of both. The rest never get any formal help. The question you should be asking is, what happens to the 80% to 90% who don't get treatment? Are those people dying? After all, recovery ideology says you can't quit an addiction without treatment. In fact, those people aren't dying. They're getting over their problems at a rate that equals and often surpasses success rates for those who receive treatment. So, the claim that treatment is needed is dreadfully wrong. Nobody needs treatment for addiction. The folks who say this have a biased view. They work in treatment and see only the people who come to them for treatment. Then, in treatment, they teach those people that they'll die if they don't stay involved in treatment and support groups. Most treatment advocates are privy to only the research done on those who've undergone intense indoctrination in treatment. They are unaware of what happens in the lives of those who don't sign on to recovery ideology. They don't know what becomes of the other 80% to 90% who never get formal help. Luckily, though, this information is available. 100. Currently resolved drug addiction. St. QG UGS Curse QEEOI 03. NCS 1990-92 NCSR 2001-03 NISR 2001-02. The U.S. government has conducted several epidemiological studies that surveyed tens of thousands of people to find out about their mental health and substance use histories. Every such study that's been done has found that most people, treated or not, eventually resolve their substance use problems. The following chart shows 3 such studies, Heyman, 2013. As you can see, among the 3 studies shown here, approximately 80% of people who were ever addicted to drugs were not currently addicted. That is, they resolved their drug use problems. Collectively, those studies surveyed more than 60,000 people from the general population. These studies are representative of the U.S. population as a whole, while most addiction research uses very small sample sizes taken from a people in treatment programs. Treated versus untreated alcoholics in NISR. Treated untreated. O still dependent. At no longer dependent. Adapted O. Dawson, D. A. Grant, Stinson, F.S., Joe, P., Huang, B., and Ruan, W.J., 2005. Recovery from DSM-4 Alcohol Dependence, United States, 2001 to 2002. Addiction. 100, 281 to 292. doi 10.11/1360.0443.2004.00964.x. The last study on that chart, Niezerk, Dawson et al., 2005, had the largest survey group, 43,000 people, and offered some of the most detailed information available. It offered data that compared treated alcoholics to untreated alcoholics. Look at the results in the chart below. As you can see, the likelihood of ending alcohol dependence is nearly equal for both treated and untreated alcoholics, slightly higher if you don't get treatment. All of them met the diagnostic criteria for alcohol addiction, and yet it made almost no difference whether they were treated. Most of them eventually resolved their problems. What would you conclude if you took a group of people with a disease and gave some of them medical treatment and the others no treatment, yet both groups recovered equally? You'd have to conclude that both groups resolved their problems by their own power. You'd conclude that the treatment doesn't really work. And if it doesn't work, then you certainly wouldn't say that it's needed. Your conclusions would be correct, and they apply equally to addiction treatment. Nobody needs it, and it's important for you to realize that it doesn't work for anyone, in the sense of causing them to stop or reduce their drinking. There are people who will attribute their recovery to addiction treatment because it is part of their personal story, so they assume they needed it. They are as wrong as people who take a placebo, get over a medical problem by processes of their own immune systems, and then credit the placebo for their recovery. They would have gotten over their problem without the treatment. Now, remember what the treatment advocates are saying, that addicts can't control themselves and can't stop using substances without treatment. A mountain of evidence indicates the contrary. The studies above, as well as yearly surveys, show that over time, people naturally quit or reduce their substance use to non-problematic levels on their own. Most addictions start when people are in their early 20s, and more than half of them resolve by 30 years old. Problematic substance use rapidly declines with age. When researchers crunched these numbers in the Niezerk data, figuring in the trends on age, they found that more than 9 out of 10 will eventually resolve their substance use problems, treated or not. More precisely, the probability that problematic substance users will resolve their problem for various substances follows: Heyman, 2013. Alcohol, 90.6%. Marijuana, 97.2%. Cocaine, 99.2%. Although the researchers didn't offer a probability rate for heroin, we have no reason to believe it should be any different. 96% of heroin addicts were currently resolved in the Niezerk data. Wu, Woody, Yang, Manelli, and Blazer, 2011. This mirrors findings from the 1970s. For example, a study on Vietnam vets diagnosed as heroin dependent found that within the first 3 years about 88% quit without relapse, and, in a 24-year-long follow-up study, 96% had eventually resolved their problems. You should also know that only 2% of those vets received treatment. Robbins, 1993. Another extremely important fact about the Vietnam vet heroin addicts is that, while the overall relapse rate was a mere 12%, those who were shuffled into treatment ended up having a staggering 67% relapse rate. That's more than 5 times worse. So, while the recovery society moans and groans that only 1 in 10 gets the treatment they need. More than 9 in 10 resolve their problems usually without treatment, and there are many cases where treatment leads to worse outcomes. The idea that anyone needs addiction treatment is flat-out misinformation. It hurts people by convincing them that they're helpless, thus taking away their motivation to try to change. And with the flood of data that's been released over the past few decades, the claim that treatment is needed is becoming worse than just misinformation. Treatment advocates are either willfully ignorant of this information, which is irresponsible, or they're just knowingly lying to the public. Nobody, and we mean nobody, needs what they're selling. Addiction and recovery, two sides of the same coin. The Recovery Society labels heavy substance use as addiction and defines it as a state of involuntary behavior caused by a disease. We simply call heavy substance use an activity that people have learned to prefer. But when substance users learn to view this preference as an addiction, it adds a layer of confusion that both blocks people from reconsidering their preferences and makes it harder for them to change should they choose to. The reasons for this are that these substance users are struggling to fight something that isn't there. They're trying to recover from a non-existent disease. It is imperative that we say this now and that you remember it, since addiction is not a disease, it can't be medically treated, and you can't recover from it. Let that sink in for a minute. Many of you seek out our solution precisely because you know something is wrong with the idea that you have a disease called addiction. However, many of you then ask us to show you how to recover from addiction, or how to get into recovery, or how to maintain recovery. You're looking for an alternative treatment for addiction. You are still looking for some outside force to battle the non-existent forces of addiction. This just goes to show the depths of your confusion and the stranglehold the Recovery Society has on our views of substance use. If your problem isn't a disease, then it can't be treated. There is no proper medical treatment for a non-medical problem. The Recovery Society and its treatment providers invented the concept of addiction whole cloth. They invented it, promoted it, and own it. You can't mention addiction without implying involuntary, unchosen behavior. They created a bogeyman called addiction that robs you of the power of choice and forces you to use substances against your will. With this concept, they created the idea that there is something to be treated, to fight, and to recover from. There is nothing to fight and nothing from which to recover. There are only personal choices to be made. Your substance use isn't involuntary. You voluntarily choose it because, for better or worse, you prefer it. You could try to recover by avoiding triggers and working on alternative coping mechanisms all you want, but if you still prefer heavy substance use, you will find yourself wanting to do it and will do it anyway. The goal of recovery puts people on the wrong path and creates obstacles where they needn't be. The concept of triggers is the perfect example. People become convinced that, if they, for example, see a billboard advertising beer, they'll be uncontrollably triggered to immediately start drinking. Life then becomes a quest to avoid such triggers for those in recovery, and they live with the paranoia that something will trigger them to drink at any moment. In this way, efforts at recovery keep addiction alive by sustaining the identity of a fragile, helpless addict. Meanwhile, when people come to the realization that they prefer being sober more than being intoxicated, nothing will trigger them into drunkenness. They can be in a room full of people swilling it up, and they won't be tempted in the slightest. Do you want to critically examine your preferences and change them, or fight a bogeyman? They are mutually exclusive courses of action. The Freedom Model will show you how you can change your preference for substance use. Think of it this way. If you didn't have cancer, you wouldn't spend your time getting chemotherapy. It would not only be a waste of your time, but it would be costly, cause you other problems, and take away from time that you could be using to build a happy life. This analogy shows the absurdity of the situation that even some people who disagree with the disease model of addiction still seek out treatment for it and focus on recovering from it. Mind you, plenty of incredibly intelligent people fall for the recovery trap because the addiction disease proponents have done an amazing job at mainstreaming their views. While the myth of addiction as a disease has been repeatedly proven false by credible research over decades, the idea of recovery from alcoholism and addiction has remained mostly unexamined with the same critical eye until now. This book will challenge everything you believe to be true about addiction and its stablemate, recovery. It will then provide a new way to see yourself as a person who is fully free to change your substance use if it is unsatisfactory to you. Once you understand that substance use is a choice and that you are in control, you can easily change your substance use. You will turn the page on this chapter of your life and move on. Some of you at this point might not think it'll be that simple, and that's the problem. When people are planning to come to our retreats to learn the Freedom Model, they often ask us to set up a year or more of weekly aftercare sessions for them. Some will even offer huge sums of money to convince us to set up this formal support system for them, but we won't do it. The idea that support is needed is a recovery society idea. It is based not only on the assumption that you are weak but, more important, on the myth that there is something you must battle. Recovery ideology states that there is a force stronger than your free will compelling you to want and use substances, that something outside of your own mind can make your decisions for you, and that some outside strength is needed to support your fight against addiction. We can't and won't support you in fighting a non-existent thing, and we can't make your choices for you. What we can do is offer information that you can use to make new choices. Once you have this information, it's up to you to use it. We are happy to report that most of our guests over the years have used this information to their advantage. We have the highest success rate of any program of help for problematic substance use. 62% of our alumni choose long-term abstinence, and many others choose moderate levels of substance use. More important, they feel happy and free from the burdens of both addiction and ongoing recovery. One way to think of the Freedom Model is that part of its goal is to help you return to the state of mind of those who resolve their problems without treatment. We want you to understand that you can make a change in your life because of a personal choice and preference instead of taking on an addict identity and fighting addiction. In our discussions with many people who have overcome their addictions without formal help, many have told us that they rejected the core ideas of addiction. They knew they could choose differently, and that doing so was only a matter of finding the motivation to see less substance use as preferable. 4. Mal research on self-changers who had problems with alcohol, heroin, and cocaine found that they cited decision-making processes, i.e., cognitive appraisal, most when discussing their path out of addiction, Sobel et al., 2001. Factors such as the presence of support were rarely mentioned. Dramatic consequences equivalent to hitting rock bottom were mentioned even less. Decision-making was the theme when they told their experiences, and often in a positive frame. For example, one former heroin user in the study said, "I made a decision in favor of life that gave me strength." 56,700 They needed treatment and did not make an effort. FO get treatment. 29%. 19.1 million. Die not feel they needed treatment. 960%. 231,000 fect they needed treatment and did make an effort. O get treatment. L 2%. 199 million people needing but OT treatment for abstinence use. There's good reason to suspect that those who don't get treatment don't buy into the whole concept of addiction and recovery. When the researchers from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, SAMHSA, asked them why they didn't get treatment, 96% of them said they don't think that they need it. Hahn, Hedden, Lipari, Coppola, and Crowdell, 2015, this group of people had the symptoms of addiction and fit the diagnosis of addiction, yet they didn't think they needed treatment, thus showing that they rejected the idea that they were powerless and unable to stop on their own. No. That recovery ideology would say these people were in denial and that they can never make any progress unless they admit they have the disease of addiction and need help. Yet they don't get help, and they do get over their problems. They get over their problems without taking on a lifestyle focused on being diseased and recovering, without the added complications of recovery, and without support. They are the majority of people with substance use problems who resolve those problems, both in raw numbers and percentages. You can and will resolve your problems too. You will by your own power, just like they did. We're here to show you that you can. You are free. The Freedom Model is all about informing you of this wonderful truth and showing you the power you have to change. If you get nothing else from this chapter, please remember this: the overwhelming majority of people who fit the diagnosis of addiction never get any addiction treatment, don't go to meetings, don't set up formal support systems, don't worry about recovery, don't think of themselves as addicted, and don't battle addiction for the rest of their lives. Nevertheless, they change. They begin to see their options and futures differently, and then they choose differently and permanently resolve their substance use problems. So can you. An important note about the Recovery Society. The term Recovery Society refers to people who spread the idea of addiction as being involuntary behavior, or driven by disease, disorder, or other causes outside the realm of personal choice. They have many wrong ideas and explanations of addiction that go well beyond the mere claim that a disease of addiction exists. These ideas include myths about the powers of drugs, various weaknesses of those they classify as addicts, and, of course, their claims about what is required to get into and maintain recovery from addiction. The Recovery Society comprises of therapists, counselors, sponsors, intellectuals, law enforcement agencies, treatment agencies, activists, and various activist organizations that spread this misinformation. Throughout this book, we speak bluntly about how wrong these people are and how damaging their ideas can be. However, we do not think these people are bad, intentionally evil, or involved in a conspiracy to mislead. As you have seen already, substance users can become victims of recovery ideology and recovery society institutions, but that is not the intention of those in the Recovery Society. Rather, this belief system that now harms people is an unfortunate consequence of historical events and missteps. It wasn't planned or orchestrated to hurt anyone. The Recovery Society may include a handful of bad actors just as there are in any group, but the overwhelming majority of people who make up Recovery Society helpers and proponents are completely well-intentioned people. They can be loving and supportive friends and helpers because they truly want to help and do care. Unfortunately, though, they are misinformed. We do not wish to personally denigrate or insult them, but our criticisms of their ideas and methods are unequivocal. We must also note that the Recovery Society is not the cause of people's choices to use substances in a problematic way. People choose their substance use based on their own beliefs that it is what they need and is worth the costs. Recovery ideology can contribute to people feeling stuck in substance use and is often the major obstacle to change. That's why we focus on unlearning this ideology. However, once this obstacle has been removed, it's still up to people to seriously reconsider their preferences if they want to change. Chapter 2. You have to want it to work. Several years ago, I, Markwscheeren, was sitting in my AA home group, and we were all lamenting over a member who had gone back to drinking and using drugs and had died. People were noticeably upset, and some were visibly frightened. Everyone parroted the same response: he just didn't want it badly enough. The Recovery Society and addiction treatment providers, regarding their treatments, often say you have to want it to work. This comes from the hard truth that people who don't want to quit upon entering a treatment program probably won't quit upon leaving the treatment program. What they're acknowledging is that the only way you will moderate or quit your substance use is if you want to moderate or quit your substance use. In this case, they are correct. This is the entire key to making a different choice. Controlled research suggests that people who seem to be successfully treated had made their choice to change their substance abuse patterns at the time they enrolled in treatment, not after having received the treatment. Some people want it to work when they sign up for treatment, so they had already changed before they were treated. For example, the results of a massive study of drinkers who enrolled for outpatient addiction counseling treatment showed that they reduced their average drinking between week 0, when they enrolled, and week 1, when they received their RST counseling session. Cutler and Fishbane. 2005. The graph below shows that this pre-treatment reduction in drinking held throughout the following 12 weeks. 2. AEP Bulletin BSULPJ5D Sulk. 9010. WK of Readment. The important thing here is that the results follow the same trajectory for 3 different groups: those who went through a full 12 weeks of treatment, those who attended only one session of treatment, and those who enrolled but didn't show up for even one counseling session. The average reduction in drinking happened at the same point in the study across all 3 groups. Drinking was decreased sharply before their first session and then hovered around that same decreased level throughout the following 12 weeks, regardless of the number of sessions they attended. This shows that treatment effectively played no role in their reduction of drinking, since the reduction took place before treatment, didn't decrease with further treatment, and didn't increase among those who didn't receive any treatment. Wanting it to work is truly everything. Yet treatment gets the credit for people's reduction in drinking, when this change happens because they simply changed their minds about drinking when they decided to enroll for treatment. Note, there are differences in the average number of drinks for the 3 groups, but this difference is a reflection of differing levels of commitment to a change. The 12 weekers were the most committed to a reduction in drinking and thus stayed most committed to attending treatment as well. Nevertheless, the more important point for this analysis is that the basic curve was identical across groups. Point 1. G8S = S. 96 by Suyakt RSIAUVUHA equals STI ET. A recent study comparing naltrexone, a drug used to reduce substance cravings, to a placebo resulted in a shockingly similar curve. Oslin et al. 2015. You can see in this graph that the placebo groups, those people taking a pill that contained no medication, reduced their drinking as much as those taking the medication. What's more, all groups reduced their average drinking at the beginning of the study and maintained this average throughout the following 12 weeks of treatment. Again, treatment gets the credit, when in fact the receipt of treatment simply coincides with people's choice to change. Naltrexone is currently being hailed as a miracle drug for addiction, yet its success is an illusion, a misattribution. The fact that the placebo groups did just as well makes this crystal clear. The proponents of recovery ideology continue to say you need treatment, yet they also continue to say you have to want it to work. What they fail to understand are the full implications of this dichotomy. They don't realize that what they're also admitting when they say you have to want it to work is that treatment is essentially useless and can't make people reduce their substance use. There is no external force, treatment included, that can impose different wants on someone. Changing your wants and desires is an autonomous activity, meaning you are the only one who can do it in the confines of your own mind by thinking things through and coming to see that you could be happier if you used less. No one else can do this for you because no one else can think for you. To change your desire for substance use, you must weigh the benefits of heavy use against the benefits of moderate use or abstinence. Whichever option you come to see as most beneficial or preferable is the option you'll truly want, become invested in, and carry out. Treatment providers and the helpers in the recovery society have no idea how to facilitate this autonomous process, so they don't even bother addressing it. Instead, they circumvent your autonomy with fear by convincing you that you must become immediately abstinent and follow their program or die, and that you are a helpless addict who has no choice but to become their ward and follow their commands. The result is that many people in this situation don't think through their options and change their wants. They may sober up for a while out of fear and obedience, but they're still left wanting heavy substance use. Eventually, it all falls apart. While the recovery society proponents do express some positivity, their approach leans more toward a presentation of doom and gloom. They do anti-help people move on from heavy substance use with the vision of a happier, more attractive alternative. Instead, they replace it with the burden of a lifelong struggle and the promise that you'll forever feel deprived. Let's quickly review what they present. As we discussed in Chapter 1, the practitioners and proponents of recovery ideology tell you that you're suffering from an incurable disease that requires treatment, a lifelong effort to battle, and ongoing support, and yet will inevitably result in periodic relapses for which you'll need more treatment. So, right off the bat, they're presenting a grim prognosis. Based solely on this description of the problem and its solution, many people immediately give up and don't even try to change. After all, if it's going to be a losing battle, then why not just continue to drink and drug? Substance use is at least offering some pleasure. And if you believe you need substances to deal with stress, anxiety, and depression, then the stress, anxiety, and depression most people feel when presented with this dire prediction is enough to make them immediately turn back to substances. This is the reason the one-year retention rate of popular support groups is in the single digits and the rate of relapse to heavy substance use immediately following inpatient treatment is estimated to be 75% or greater. Miller, Walters, and Bennett. 2001. There's more bad news. To deal with this chronic disease, you're told that you'll need to take on a recovery-centered lifestyle, which entails constant work. This means that you will need to go to meetings every day, get involved in active service work outside meetings to help other alcoholics and addicts, avoid places where people drink and drug, including regular family holiday parties and weddings, avoid triggers, such as driving by that old bar or part of town where you scored drugs, avoid images of drugs and alcohol on television, make sure you don't feel stress, anxiety, anger, or depression, or else you'll relapse, work on every life issue you have, or else you'll relapse, never have so much as a sip of alcohol or puff of a joint ever again for the rest of your life because it'll turn you into an uncontrolled, substance-using zombie. And the list goes on and on. Recovery demands that you strive ceaselessly to become a perfectly functioning, perfectly spiritual, and perfectly moral person, and even then, failure is considered inevitable. In an even subtler way, there is a movement that pushes the idea that you need a purpose-filled life to gain the resilience to not be tempted to backslide into use. Within recovery ideology, recovery doesn't mean getting over a problem and moving on, it means you will be fighting a lifelong battle that becomes even more challenging when you attach substance use to every challenge life tosses at you. In the specific case of avoiding triggers, the desire for substance use is taken as a poor manent condition to be accommodated rather than changed. This is like people with diabetes avoiding all sugar because their bodies can't handle it. That's what recovery means. Adjusting your life to accommodate your permanent handicap. The best evidence of this is the fact that the recovery proponents regularly compare addiction to a chronic disease, such as diabetes, and say the two are alike. Again, recovery ideologists skip right over the part where you could analyze your options and come to believe that you'd be happier with less or no substance use. So not only are you constantly working, struggling, and fighting to stay sober because your heavy desire for substance use is fully intact, but you're often doing so with the painful sense that you're deprived of the only thing that would make you happy. In group counseling and support meetings, you'll often hear people say things such as drinking was the only thing that ever made me feel comfortable in my own skin, or I'm having so much trouble dealing with my brother's death, and getting high would make all that pain go away. These statements reinforce the idea that you will be deprived of something wonderful and magical if you quit. When people say they're feeling weak and need support right now, they are confirming that they're fighting an internal battle against the bogeyman of addiction. But it doesn't have to be a battle. You can feel comfortable in your own skin without alcohol, and drugs don't help anyone to deal with loss. In recovery society support groups, treatment, and counseling, you never question these beliefs about substances. You never consider that life without them could be markedly better and more enjoyable. You are simply told there is no rhyme or reason to your desire for substances and not to think about it. Instead, you are presented with the declaration that you must fight your urges to use these substances because you are an addict. If you've attended treatment programs, addiction counseling, or support group meetings, you were told that you had no choice and needed to fully invest in the recovery subculture because your handicap, the disease of addiction, makes that the only place where you can safely exist. You were told you needed to have a stress-free and purpose-driven lifestyle or you'd relapse. But what if none of it were true? What if you could separate your use from all these other areas of your life and just ask yourself whether you still prefer it? The Recovery Society and its proponents completely misunderstand addiction. And they put the cart before the horse. They tell you to quit before you figure out whether you really want to quit. They don't make quitting an attractive option. either but, instead, present it as a painful and confusing option that will create a lifelong struggle. Yes, you have to want it to work, but that's all that really matters. Yet it's the one thing that's not addressed. The freedom model. A positive approach. The approach you have in front of you now is a culmination of 3 decades of continuous research, testing, and experience with helping people. At Baldwin Research Institute, we've never stopped evolving our method, and it has provided great success all along. It has changed many times, sometimes dramatically. At the beginning, we used and recommended many elements of the 12 steps. In fact, we were members of AA. Our initial goal was to find which parts of AA worked, and over the years, we weeded out elements one by one that we discovered were counterproductive, limiting, or unnecessary. Eventually, it became clear that there were no elements of the disease concept and 12-step methodologies that were helpful, so we subsequently discarded all of it. Through all this, one thing has remained constant since the beginning: we have always presented a positive vision of self-initiated, self-propelled change. You've already gotten some of this positive message when we told you in Chapter 1 that you can and will get over your problems without a lifetime of treatment and support. We gave you mountains of evidence to back up that claim. Know this: you can make changes, and you're going to be alright. 9 out of 10 people get over these problems, and most don't get treatment. Of those who do, only a fraction follow the treatment protocol of lifelong support. Most of the people who are successful simply move on with their life. Yes, and so can you. Do you want recovery? One of the most important discoveries we've made over the years is that shedding the identity of addict or alcoholic and focusing on creating whatever life you want for yourself is far better than focusing on recovery. We know this confuses some of you because you think you want recovery and we're putting it down. Once you understand what recovery means in the realm of substance use problems, you'll decide it's not what you want. If you've never been involved with the Recovery Society, its groups, or treatment programs, you might think recovery is a good thing because you define it as getting over a substance use problem. But if you've been in the Recovery Society, you know that's not how the term is defined. As we described above, recovery is a lifestyle built around a negative addict self-image and focused on fighting the disease of addiction. Recovery has no end. It's a state of limbo in which you constantly fear relapse and sustain a self-image of fragility that keeps you in self-doubt and fosters permanent victimhood. This definition is also codified into official policy in language suggested by the White House, whereby the term former/reformed addict should not be used but instead replaced with the terms person in recovery and not actively using, Ferner, 2015. Of course, in this model, not actively using means you are still a person with substance use disorder. Recovery keeps the bogeyman of addiction alive and well in your mind, and that's a tragic mistake. Recovery is both a set of ideas, the self-image of addict/alcoholic or person with substance use disorder according to new language guidelines, and a set of actions, work to battle the disease of addiction. Both the ideas and the actions obscure what lies at the core of personal change. Research has shown that belief in the disease model of addiction leads to relapse into problematic substance use, Miller, Westerberg, Harris, and Tanigan. 1996, and multiplies binge use at an alarming rate, Brandsma, 1980. As soon as people enter addiction treatment and learn these ideas, their risk of fatal overdose goes up and peaks immediately after they discontinue addiction. Treatment, Pierce et al., 2016. The self-image of the struggling, helpless addict. Taught by the Recovery Society increases substance use problems and leads people to struggle longer. The conclusion is, treatment creates addicts and alcoholics cornered into perpetual recovery. Learning recovery ideology doesn't reduce people's desire for substance use but rather engenders fear and makes them feel cornered into abstinence. Sometimes, substance users sit in that corner for a long time, dying to use substances and feeling miserable and deprived. Every now and then, while nobody is looking, they sneak out of the corner and get as high as they can until they get put back in the corner. While in the corner, the Recovery Society expects them to walk through a set of actions that define recovery. Unfortunately, those actions don't decrease their desires to use and often do the opposite. Many people who attend support group meetings, such as AA and NA, report that their desire to use substances is greatest right after leaving a meeting. There is no disease of addiction, so ironically, when you focus on taking actions meant to fight it, you can only hurt yourself. Recovery ideology tells people that, at best, they can become perpetually recovering, as in constantly battling addiction, with a constant threat of relapse. In our early days, we told people they could be recovered, in the past tense, as in being confident that they're done with problematic substance use and no longer needing to fight it. This idea was a definite step in the right direction, to offer the possibility of a better self-image than the recovery ideology offers. Lost in processes. Unfortunately, we too got caught up in processes. We thought there was a lot of good in the actions prescribed in the 12-step program. In the early years of our research, many of our teachings were based directly on these activities, and everyone who worked at BRE and the retreat were AA members. We operated on the AA slogan, "Do what I did to get what I got," which means that if one person goes through a set of actions and gets over his or her substance use problem, then another person should be able to mindlessly take those same actions and get the same result. How embarrassing it is for us to admit and put into print, but since we attended support meetings and spent all our time helping newcomers, we thought this activity was what caused us to get over our substance use problems. We would then recommend this behavior to the next person, telling him or her to go to meetings and help people. Do what I did to get what I got approaches personal change like baking a cake, and thus treats people like unconscious, lifeless elements that can be physically manipulated and reformed by an external force. That's painfully wrong. People aren't lifeless matter to be manipulated. All people have free will, a positive drive, and mental autonomy. Because of this inherent nature of humans, too, people can have the same experiences, but each one comes out with a different set of ideas. One person may go about helping other addicts and learn something valuable from the experience that he applies to his own problems. Another person may find it to be an annoying chore and gains no insight into making her own personal changes last. The truth is that, even for those who both quit substance use and helped other addicts, the quitting came first. The activity of helping others didn't cause them to quit. There is no set of actions by which you can reliably make someone stop desiring drugs and alcohol. Meeting attendance and service work have nothing to do with developing a mindset where your desire for substances is reduced. They are not a recipe for success, but simply temporary distractions. Recovery ideology completely misses this point about recipes, including the progressive alternative approaches now coming into fashion. These alternative Treatment providers acknowledge that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. Going to meetings and doing the 12 steps doesn't work for everyone. They say there are different combinations of treatments that work for different people. Sadly, even these well-intentioned mavericks still hold onto the idea that people are like flour and eggs that can be transformed by external forces to make a sober cake. They think there are many different recipes to follow and that it's just a matter of finding the right one. Part of our recipe for many years had been helping our guests make a plan to rebuild their whole life and find more fulfilling activities to replace heavy substance use. We called it replacement. Since most of our guests at that time were ripe for such life improvements, we offered a focus on goal setting and self-analysis to address this need. We assumed goal setting was needed to cause a change in substance desire and use. Like treatment, we too connected substance use and other life issues in this casual way. We said things like, if you're not happy, you won't stay sober, or if you don't have purpose, you'll continue to get high. This was a mistake. In time, we recognized that there were many gurus who didn't need to rebuild their entire lives because they had plenty of fulfilling life activities on their plates already. But of even more importance, there were many guests who left with no goals and no plan, who never got drunk or high again or reduced their levels of use. Based on what we believed at the time, these people should have been struggling in their purposeless lives. But they didn't, and we began to see that substance use need not be tied to these qualities. People could just stop or decrease their use and live exactly as they wished, with a greater purpose or without it. Besides, we're in no position to decide what qualifies as a purpose-driven life, and we certainly can't judge what brings happiness to people. Happiness is unique to everyone and exists in his or her mind. For the people who changed their substance use habits, it was simple. Once they realized that the entire construct of addiction was a myth, they moved past their substance use regardless of any other changes in their lifestyles. Just knowing they were choosing their use was enough to open the way to stopping or reducing it. That's the freedom model in a nutshell. After that one issue was resolved, they simply moved on. Some went out and created goals, and others went home and conducted their lives as they always had, but now without substance use problems. Knowing this information indicated to us what the solution is. It's not found in prescribing a set of actions, ALS, or life involvements at all, but instead is found in a person's direct perspective of substance use. Regardless of whether people are rich or poor, come from abusive or loving backgrounds, or have psychological problems, they have a strong desire for substance use only because they think they get significant benefits from it. That is, they use substances because they prefer to. People will stop preferring substance use only when they reassess and gain a new perspective on it and the option of changing it. There is no need to replace use, there is just a choice to be made regarding what level of use you believe will bring you the greatest amount of happiness. Moving forward, you can't prescribe a plan of recovery, aftercare plan, or any other set of actions that will guarantee a change in perspective of a person's options. In fact, all those actions are nothing more than a distraction. Wanting it to work means you must genuinely want something different. You can mindlessly help other addicts or alcoholics while making absolutely no change in how you think about substances, just like the treatment industry advocates that millions do every year. You can go to meetings thinking you're getting support for your recovery and sit there pining away to get drunk or high. Where these plans of action go wrong is that they're plans of action. They allow you to feel like you're addressing your problem, when you really aren't. They're distractions and provide a way to ride the fence on reassessing and figuring out whether you'd be happier putting heavy substance use behind you forever. Thoughts are changed by direct choice within your own mind, not by mimicking the actions of others, not by driving to meetings and attending them, not by seeking a purpose to replace use, and not by avoiding stress or triggers. All of that distracts you from looking at whether continued use is still attractive to you and deciding whether to continue to use and at what level. Unplug your concept of substance use from the distractions, and it becomes clear, you can choose to stop, based on whether you even like it anymore, or moderate, based on how much you still like it. To facilitate this better, we had to strip our program down to the content that addresses that issue. Then, we had to deal with those specific issues comprehensively and throw out the distractions that didn't matter. Our guests had been telling us for a long time exactly what matters, the ideas and the facts. But we stubbornly kept the extraneous processes and actions and the concept of replacement. Over a 10-year period, Markwscheeren, a co-creator of the Freedom Model, personally conducted follow-up interviews with program graduates during which he would ask the graduates whether they had been abstinent. These interviews would later become studies conducted by outside, independent research firms. For those who were abstinent or reported significantly reduced levels of substance use, he would follow up by asking them what they felt was the most important part of the experience for them. Repeatedly, the graduates said, "You told me I had a choice." When asked whether they were doing the selfless service work that our book had prescribed, or they were working to attain or had attained their goals and found greater purpose, some had, but many more were just living their lives, with no thought of those ideals, and using the resources that had been freed up when they reduced their substance use to enjoy their lives in other ways. Please understand that we are not opposed to a purpose-driven life, but we are opposed to judging what is and isn't a better purpose for others. Using substances has a purpose. At its core it's to get high and be happy for a while. Some people think a life that includes substance use has no purpose, while others think a life of abstinence has greater purpose. There are plenty of abstinent people who don't purport to live purpose-filled lives. We have found these two things to be unrelated. It's not for anyone to decide whether another person's life has meaning and purpose. That is very personal to each individual and is not related to substance use at all. We concluded that we no longer needed to judgmentally prescribe goals, actions, and processes to our guests. It became clear that our goal needed to be to help people understand that they, and no one else, were the only cause of their use. We saw that people could find their own avenues to purpose and happiness in their lives, especially after they came to grips with the fact that they were choosing their use. Once people understood their inherent power of free will and choice regarding substances, they naturally moved on with their lives. There was nothing they needed to artificially replace anymore. In the final analysis, all people have their own personal purpose in life, and no one else can make that purpose better or more right. Any program that says you should replace drugs with better alternatives is prescribing nothing more than judgment that some activities are morally superior to others. Slate, a co-creator of the Freedom Model, worked as a presenter of the Freedom Model at the retreat for 2 years, from 2003 to 2005. We called the presenters instructors in those early days. A few years later, with the rise of social media, many former guests tracked him down to offer their thanks. He asked each of them what had helped, and they all said the same thing to him that Mark's guests had said, What had helped them most was learning that they had a choice and could pursue greater happiness. Many of these people who contacted him had been young adults whose families had intervened early. They didn't want to reduce their substance use at all throughout their stay at the retreat. They had been determined to leave the retreat and go back to the same extreme levels of substance use while avoiding being caught. He was shocked that they were thanking him years later, but they said things like, "Yeah, I went wild for a while after leaving the retreat. But when things started to get bad, I remembered that you told me I had a choice and that I might be happier without drugs, and then I just quit. Thank you." When Steven piloted the day class version of our service in our New York City office, he was teaching the entire process taught at the retreat, but it quickly became apparent that it was overkill. Right off the bat, he had several guests who began the freedom model while they were currently drinking, but after a few hours of classes over a couple of weeks, they quit or decreased their drinking with little or no difficulty. They hadn't even made it to the part of the curriculum that recommends particular goal-setting actions or purpose-driven processes. They had just covered the evidence showing that there is no disease and no loss of control and that they were free to change and likely would. They discussed the idea that, if they saw reducing substance use as a happier option, they would easily change. And that's just what they did. They said things like, "I've been duped by treatment, but I now know it's really easy to change, and I already did it. Thank you." In these cases, Steven happily cut the curriculum short because they had found their solution in learning just a few key pieces of information. By now, Steven has had several students to whom he has given a single research paper from a medical journal that debunks the biggest myths of addiction and recovery. He gave them this paper just before either the first or second class. Upon reading this information, they began to feel completely free to change and then quickly did so. We've repeatedly had proven to us that the ideas and information, rather than any gimmicky processes, were all that mattered. There is no set of actions you can mimic, no special environmental condition you can live in, no perfect set of goals you can create, no support you can garner from others, or no pharmaceutical you can take that will make you not want to use substances. They are all indirect approaches that, if you rely on them, will distract you from the simple and direct approach: think differently and make different choices. Indirect processes of change. We define indirect processes of change as any methods that don't directly address a person's preference for using substances. It's important to remember that this preference is the product of the benefits you see in substance use and its perceived value relative to the options of less or no substance use. The most poignant example of an indirect process is the various pharmaceutical treatments for addiction. These methods target neurons instead of people's thoughts and ideas about substance use, so they are doomed to fail in changing anyone's motivation to use, i.e., preference. There are two classes of pharmaceutical treatments for addiction: those that relieve withdrawal, such as methadone, Suboxone, or nicotine replacement patches, and those that modify or block the effects of substances, such as naltrexone, and Antabuse, and Chantix. Some of them act with a combination of these effects. None of them have been very successful. Let's examine one of them to see the principle in action. Naltrexone is a drug that fills in opiate receptors in the brain so that, when opiates or alcohol are taken, the effects perceived as pleasurable are blocked and not felt, thus earning this drug the title of a blocker. This pharmacological mechanism is well understood and verifiable. However, researchers also claim that naltrexone reduces cravings, and yet they openly admit they have no working theory on a pharmacological mechanism by which the drug reduces cravings. This claim is based solely on the observation that some people report getting fewer cravings when they are on naltrexone. These blockers are all the rage right now with fans of alternative methods of recovery. There have been plenty of naltrexone success stories in the media over the past few years in which those who have used it claim that it's as if this wonder drug flipped a switch that made them stop craving. But does it really flip a switch to turn off cravings? At the beginning of the chapter, we showed a graph from a recent study comparing naltrexone with a placebo. The curve showed that a nearly identical reduction in drinking took place at intake for both the patients on naltrexone and those taking an inert placebo. This suggests that something other than the drug was responsible for the reduction in drinking, and, thus, the reduction in craving. It's reasonable to assume that the individuals who reduced their craving and substance use when taking naltrexone had already reached the point where they no longer saw frequent intoxication as their preferred state. What else could explain the fact that a placebo worked just as well as the drug? Online message boards are filled with testimonials from people who took naltrexone and either felt no reduction in craving for alcohol or felt an initial reduction in craving that wore off quickly. In our review of these testimonials, we found that many expressed a sincere desire for a solution to their troubles. However, they also expressed the insight that I don't think I was ready to quit yet. Of course, what this statement means is that they still preferred drinking. This might sound like a contradiction, but it's not. It's entirely possible and common to both want your troubles to end and continue wanting to do the thing that's causing those troubles. The reason is because people want the thing, in this case, alcohol, for the benefits they perceive they will get from it but don't want the negative consequences. Medication-assisted therapies work the same way a restrictor plate in a race car works. Now, you might not know what that is, so let us explain. Years ago, in NASCAR racing, the executives of NASCAR wanted to make racing safer by limiting the speeds of the race cars. They did this by making a rule that all the cars were now required to have a small metal plate in the car's engine that restricts the flow of fuel, which forces all the cars to have a limited top speed. But here's the issue. If NASCAR officials would let them, the drivers would happily remove those restrictor plates because they want to win races and are willing to take on the risks of the higher speeds. Currently, even with the restrictor plates in place, all the drivers on the race course have their gas pedals mashed to the floorboards to wring out every bit of speed they can from the restricted engine. And here is the parallel to pharmacological therapies. The restrictor plates did not stop race car drivers from wanting, craving, to go faster. They simply made race car drivers, who once enjoyed going extremely fast, frustrated race car drivers who are now forced to go slower. That isn't unlike the frustrated and deprived former heroin users who are now getting the Vivitrol shot and still wanting desperately to get high but are now frustrated. Essentially, they have self-administered restrictor plates in their brains that do not allow them to enjoy what they really want to do, which is to feel high. The effect is that they crave even more. They want, they desire, and they dream of getting high. Like the drivers and mechanics who are motivated to go faster and are willing to cheat on the racetrack by secretly bypassing the restrictor plates in their cars, we see thousands of people every day who continue to use heroin while taking naltrexone, Suboxone, or methadone. Pharmacology does not change a person's likes and dislikes, motives, or desires and cravings any more than a restrictor plate makes a race car driver a lover of driving more slowly. Online message boards are filled with discussions by people who've been coerced into taking naltrexone for opiate habits. The following comments refer to a long-lasting naltrexone injection. Another reluctant naltrexone patient describes the torture of feeling a continued desire for opiates with no way to feel their effects. They are people who, as evidenced by their resistance to addiction treatment, don't want it to work. Someone is coercing them to take naltrexone. While on it, they complain that they can't get high, they crave all the time, and they're losing their minds. Just because the drug blocks the flow of receptors that facilitate getting a high does not mean the drug will take away cravings. A recent study of naltrexone for alcohol showed that both patients who were on the real drug and those on the placebo similarly reduced their craving and drinking. The fact is that those who believe it works had already figured out before they started taking the drug that they'd be happier with less substance use. Taking this drug was just a symbolic part of their decision to change. It may have provided a convenient storyline for them as well. It's comforting to think that your behavior was the result of a disease and that you needed a pill to change it. That wipes away a lot of shame. The idea that this drug reduces cravings is an illusion though. The drug didn't change these people, they changed themselves by changing their perspectives on the relative value of heavy substance use in their lives. If we take their interpretation of their experiences as proof that naltrexone was what worked to reduce their desire for alcohol and then recommend that others with a strong desire for opiates or alcohol do the same, then we've missed the point of what really drove the change, wanting it to work. If you force people suffering from a strep infection to take penicillin, it wouldn't matter whether they want or don't want the medication to work. Either way, the drug would eradicate the infection. Likewise, if a drug could remove cravings, then it wouldn't matter whether someone had been coerced to take it or voluntarily took it, because the drug would work regardless. But we see here that it does matter. In fact, based on the data, it's the only thing that matters. People who don't want it to work do not experience reduced craving while on it. Desire is a matter of the mind, not one of pharmacological processes. We've heard countless anecdotes about paths out of addiction that are then turned into plans of recovery. They all fall into the trap of focusing on the actions that accompanied change for some people rather than the ideas that drove the change. For example, many people become obsessed with healthy living and nutrition when they quit using substances. They take supplements, eat organic foods, and avoid unhealthy foods. They say that doing these things reduces their cravings. Stephen, a co-author of this book, ate tons of fried, fast, and sugary foods, both before and several years after having resolved his substance use problem. Why didn't he relapse because of his poor nutrition? And why did many people, whom he's personally witnessed, who became obsessed with healthy foods quickly relapse? The answer is simple: what people choose to eat has nothing to do with their choice to use or not use substances. The same is true for working out. People who focused on physical fitness, when they quit, say that, if you do this too, you will get and stay sober. Some even have very scientific sounding explanations for why it will work for you. That working out replaces the endorphins you need, and those endorphins somehow translate into losing the desire for substances. Yet physical fitness and yoga classes and trips to the gym have become a common feature in most rehabs, but success rates haven't gone up. I instinctively knew this was a silly idea the day I saw a health food guru / yoga teacher show up at the retreat with a massive crack cocaine habit. Anyone who recommends these plans of action suffers from the belief that people are like unconscious matter that can be transformed by actions and biological influences. Well, your physical body can certainly be transformed this way, but your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs, all products of your mind, cannot. Your mind and its thoughts are what drive your desire for substance use. If you drink a healthy smoothie every day while retaining the belief that you need to be high or drunk to be happy, you will still have a great desire for substances. The same is true for taking on goals and new activities as a plan of action that will combat addiction. There are correlations that show lower rates of substance use problems in people who are married, raising families, and more educated and have higher paying careers and some involvement in organized religion and their community. It's often been pointed out that many women quit their substance use problems immediately upon getting pregnant, and many men do too as soon as their first child is born. These things are all true, but the fact that they are true doesn't mean that, if people take on these things as goals, their desire for substance use will decrease as a result. You should know that, over the years at our retreats, we have seen every demographic there is, from homeless sex workers to CEOs of multimillion-dollar corporations and everything between. Which is to say that we've seen people with all the factors and goal paths that correlate with less substance use problems, and yet they still have substance use problems. Although these correlations hold across large groups, they don't hold with individuals. The college-educated stay-at-home mom with 3 kids who is involved in the PTA and church and whose husband makes enough money to hire a nanny for extra help will still down 2 bottles of wine a day if she believes that wine adds something indispensable to her life. Her thoughts about her life and whether the wine adds to it are all that matter in whether she'll keep desiring it. We've seen plenty of people who chased goals and improved their lives in many ways but still went back to problematic substance use. And we've also seen people with next to nothing going for them who easily resolved their substance use problems. What they did was change their perspective on substance use and come to believe their life would be better without it. Many people stop using substances heavily and go back to school, start new careers and relationships, and have children. The things they do don't cause their change in substance use. What does is that they change their perspectives on substance use first, which then changes their desire and use of substances, which in turn frees up time and resources to pursue those things. Having a child won't cause you to get sober. Just ask anyone who grew up with parents who used substances problematically. We recommend that you don't get stuck on plans of recovery, plans of action, or processes that aim to indirectly change your substance use. Don't look to change the physical and external as a means of changing the mental and internal. These tactics are not effective. There is no physical or external process that will decrease your desire for substances. Your desire for substances is mental, it is a product of your perspective of your various options. If there is anything that could be called a process in the freedom model, it would be the process of mentally choosing. Every day, you make choices, and those choices are no different from choosing to change your substance use. Except for the fact that you've learned to see them as being relatively easy to make. Changing your substance use is a normal choice, which means that all normal internal processes that apply to normal choices, such as judging, re-evaluating, deciding, or assessing, accurately describe what you're doing when you change your substance use. Again, that you have to want it to work is another way of saying you will do what you really want to do. If you want to keep using heavily, you will. If you want to use moderately, you will, and if you want to abstain, you will. The Freedom Model is here to show you that you are truly free to change your wants and choices.